In terms of museum foundations, we come at the end of the 19th century, so 1898. What we have is a collection that has many firsts. So the first Monet that was bought by a public collection in the United States. We were one of the first, if not the first, to showcase photography as an art form. So ranging from Arms and Armor to European to Asian. We have a big category for Asian, although Asia is much, much bigger than all the rest. And archaeological material. But it is a collection of 40,000 objects. We have had a huge success with our traveling exhibitions. Every year, about 1 million people see artworks from the Worcester Art Museum outside of Worcester.
Philip Gentner was our first director, and he spent a lot of time going to Europe, looking at art there and thinking about how to build this collection. And what I find really wonderful in the story of Gentner sort of buying this Monet water lily is that he went to the exhibition in Paris where Monet was debuting his water lilies where the horizon had been removed. You know, because Monet had been painting water lilies in the pond at his home in Giverny for some time at that point. But you could still see the Japanese bridge that was on the pond. You could see, the bank of the pond. You could see a horizon. But as he continues to revisit this subject, he starts to eliminate that horizon, and all we see is the surface of the water. And we see this interplay between the reflection of the sky and the water's surface. And it becomes abstract almost, that we see him leaving a lot of what Impressionism was in the 19th century and moving towards something new, something more modern. And certainly he's painting at a time when you have post-Impressionism already sort of expanding. The Fauves are already painting at this time. You have Expressionism taking off in Germany. And so Monet himself is exploring the frontiers of Impressionism. Philip Gentner chooses not to buy Monet from the 70s, 1870s, 1880s, or 1890s, but rather his most radical work. And I think that shows a lot of bravery on the part of our first director. And we're a museum that takes risks, and that we want to introduce our visitors to new, exciting forms of art.
Been here for 13 years, we continued to buy Impressionist paintings, some of which are on in the show. It's an everyday painting. It's not something where you need to know certain codes. You don't need to be informed about Christianity because these paintings are not church paintings. It's the here and now of a certain period that is not too far away from us. And so it's easy to access, and it is visually stunning. When you think about the way the brushwork goes, the way colors are applied, it's absolutely stunning.
Well, I think there is something about Impressionism, specifically the fact that the artist is interested in capturing a specific moment in time, that gives it a sense of familiarity, that you're drawn into this landscape or this world that's just in a moment. So it doesn't have the timeless quality of earlier European art, and it's much more accessible in that regard. But it also elevates the mundane from something that, we just experienced to something truly beautiful. So there's the allure of beautiful pictures, but also this sense that you know the place, so that you can know the person that's in the image because of the way they're being depicted and represented. And I think that is what makes Impressionism such a popular art form, that you're always feeling there's a comfortableness with it. Well, there's certainly a lot of familiar names in this exhibition, like Sisley, Pissarro, Monet. But what I really wanted to emphasize was this outward movement of Impressionism from France. We think of Impressionism in Paris in the 19th century, But what I think is really remarkable is the fact that it became so transportable, to other countries in Europe, but also across oceans to other continents. And in the case of our collection, we can really look at, what happens in the United States and think about what are the frontiers of Impressionism. And frontier in English means, borders, boundaries. And at the time that Impressionism comes to the United States, the US has a lot of momentum pushing westward and thinking about what are the new frontiers of the United States. And Impressionist artists were brought to the West to help capture some of this new landscape, certainly new to people in the Northeast. And I find that really interesting. We see it with the European artists, looking at North Africa, these unfamiliar terrains, and Impressionism, because of this idea of painting exactly what you see, becomes a way of taking the unfamiliar and making it familiar. But then we also see it as an art movement that's very much engaged with innovation. So we can think of innovation frontiers as well. And that's really a focus of this exhibition, is how does Impressionism leave its origins in Europe and move outward? It's interesting when you look at the biographies of the American Impressionists that are represented in our exhibition. So many of them traveled to France to study in the late 19th century. When they returned to the United States, they looked to American subjects. What are the kinds of images that would feel truly American? What I also think is interesting among the American Impressionists was that they formed artist colonies, maybe even more so, that you had people working together, spending a lot of time closely together in shared spaces, painting similar subjects. And so it was a very collaborative art movement in the United States as well.
So I have two favorites. One is Max Slevogt, and it's a self-portrait in his garden. And the other one is by Lovis Corinth, portrait of his wife in front of a mirror. And it's almost, you see him looking over the head of his wife into the mirror, and you see both in that mirror. And what makes that painting, beyond the very interesting composition, fascinating, is also that the artist had a stroke shortly before and couldn't paint anymore in the same precise way that he did prior. And so it's the struggle also with his incapacity in that painting that I find absolutely amazing.
Charles Hassam is my favorite of the Impressionist painters, and in some ways it's for very personal reasons, because one of the paintings in our exhibition, Columbus Avenue, Rainy Day, was painted 3 blocks away from my apartment in Boston. And there's something I just really love about thinking about Charles Hassam having lived in my neighborhood over 100 years ago. But I think what's really lovely about it is that it is a reminder to me to see the beauty just in the everyday. Well, I think one of my favorite paintings in the exhibition is by DeWitt Partial, who was an American Impressionist, and he was hired by the Santa Fe Railroad Company, along with other American Impressionists, to travel to the Grand Canyon and to paint what he saw. And then these paintings were used to advertise the Grand Canyon as a tourist destination and to familiarize Americans with this new astounding terrain.
When you think the origin of Impressionism comes from France, which was at that time, and still continues to be to a certain point, a cultural center globally. And everybody looked to Paris and took something away and made it their own. And we have now many cultural centers, but one of them is actually Seoul, when you think about K-pop and all these movements. And to think how something that really has the finger on the pulse of what resonates all around the globe, how it can create a movement, is really, really interesting. And I very much hope that our visitors not are not just looking at this Impressionism as something foreign, but are very proud of what is produced in South Korea right now, which is a leading cultural entity, and might also resonate at one point all over the globe.
And I think what visitors will see when they come to see the exhibition are some very familiar names. Monet, it doesn't really get more familiar than that when we think of Impressionists, but there's going to be a lot of names that people don't recognize. I think maybe most surprisingly, Joseph Greenwood, who is an artist I had never heard of before I started working at the Worcester Art Museum, and he's Worcester's own Impressionist painter. And so what I hope is that this will be an experience where visitors come and they see the familiar faces that they were looking for, but that it completely expands their understanding of Impressionism and their appreciation of other artists who hang alongside our French Impressionists.